Sisters and brothers in the Dharma, Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bin. Welcome to Padmaloka, a beautiful spring morning in Padmaloka, and welcome to the Padmaloka Shrine Room with the 18 of us here living now at Padmaloka. I think it's about 5 weeks now since we've gone into this lockdown, into this period of, for us, 18 of us in, as it were, solitude and dwelling apart from everybody else and everything else, this experience of sort of isolation and withdrawal. And we really are in very good conditions, as I've said many times before when I've given talks which are going out hopefully to be seen and heard by many people. We really are in a sort of paradise. I mean, the garden is astonishingly beautiful. Stiramani, our gardener's efforts, it's all bearing abundant, well, not fruit at the moment, but certainly flowering. Wonderful apple blossoms and cherry blossoms, and the wisteria is blooming with its very mysterious, exotic, clove-like scent. There are pansies and wallflowers and marigolds, and so many flowers appearing, and of course birds and bees and deer and the various cats that have made their home in Padmaloka. It's very, very beautiful indeed. And we're sitting in this beautiful shrine room where we're on our day retreat, our weekly Wednesday day retreat. And yes, although we have these wonderful conditions for practice and for study and to spend time with one another in friendship and to relax together and work hard to keep beautifying Padmaloka. Even with all this, we are still very conscious of the world outside and the suffering outside and the hardship outside. People have been writing to us. I mentioned in, I think, one of my earlier talks that we like to hear from people. We don't just, we've had so much appreciation for the bits and pieces that we're sending out, which does give us a lot of support, and it makes us feel that we're doing something and something of value for people. So do please, if you feel moved, do keep saying that to us. It's very, very helpful, because we have our own uncertainties, particularly the uncertainty of the future and the future sustainability of a retreat centre like Padmaloka, like our other retreat centres and our city centres. So we want to feel, obviously, that we're on the right course, placing a lot of value in our Dharma life and in our work for Padmaloka. But we're also hearing about your experiences of being in this very strange sort of world that we're in, and that there's a sort of variety of experiences. Some people write and say that their sense of Sangha is becoming even more stronger and their practice is becoming stronger. Some people are writing and saying it's really challenging, it's really difficult both for them and for the environment, the world that they're in. This is coming from all over the world to us. So it's very important that we hear this. Of course, we keep an eye on the news. We have to keep an eye on the news and how things are developing. But the personal communications are of very great value to us, and hearing from people, in the caring professions, in the health professions and so on, hearing what it's like, being with a family and being alone and so on. So we want to hear all those things. It feeds into our Dharma practice. It helps us clarify our Dharma practice, our lives, what we're doing here at Padmaloka. And yes, we're exploring the Bodhicaryavatara. We're doing it in 2 ways here. We're at Padmaloka, we're having these weekly talks on Shantideva's great text, and every Sunday morning we have a 3-hour study group, all 18 of us, on the Bodhicaryavatara, on the text. I think we've got through about 12 verses now. we go off in all sorts of directions. And the Mahayana theme is also alive on Thursday nights, where Dharmadeepa is taking members of the community through the White Lotus Sutra and Bhante's lectures on that sutra. There's lots of other things that we're doing, but we're the Bodhisattva path, the great way to enlightenment, seems to be the really important theme, that's alive for us all. I want to start today's talk by reminiscing, by being a bit autobiographical. I want to go back to when I was 19 years old. I want to go back to 1976. I want to go back to a weekend retreat in an old farmhouse in Thetford Forest, just south of here. I want to go back to my ordination retreat, which was just a weekend retreat. Nowadays, of course, we have these really long 4-month retreats, very, very thorough training. But back in those days, you could be ordained on a weekend retreat. Of course, Bhante was everything. Bhante was our teacher, our preceptor, our spiritual friend. He was everything. He was just Bhante. We didn't even talk about preceptors in those days, public and private preceptors. They were just Bhante and, the small community of order members. And, Bhante ordained you when, he and the order members thought you were ready. And I was ordained on a weekend retreat with Ratnaguna, who was a good friend then and remains a firm friend, sealed, if you like, through that magical weekend. And it really was a magical weekend. It was a really wonderful time for me. I felt I was given everything by Bhante. Bhante appeared like this. That's why I have this picture here. This is a painting by Aloka based on a photograph, wearing his patched yellow robes with the beads he used to use in those days and long hair. And I love that particular image of Bhante because that's how he was in those days at the time of my ordination. And I like the fact that he's wearing the patched robes of a renunciate, but he's got long hair, the long hair of, a long-haired person, and he's wearing beads. I like the kind of clash of iconography in that. I think that communicates something of great importance, certainly great importance and value to me. And it really was a magical weekend. I felt that, Bhante just poured himself out. Not only did he ordain myself and Ratnaguna, not only did he lead the meditations and the pujas, he led study all that weekend on the Shepherd's Search for Mind. You can see a record of that in The Art of Discipleship. Bhante talking about the nature of mind, the nature of pure mind beyond subject and object. Bhante talking about renunciation. I felt that he poured everything into myself and Ratnaguna and the others of us on that weekend. He just gave of himself fully and completely, and everything was sort of essentialized down into the ordination itself. I sometimes feel that, leaving aside everything else that Bhante has given me, both directly and indirectly, actually, if there was just particularly what he did at ordination, particularly transmitting a mantra and therefore, setting the course of my order life in terms of meditation, if there was just that, and as well as the name giving, I'd have everything. I'd have everything. That was a kind of essence of everything. And it was a very joyous occasion, a very, very joyous occasion. I remember at the time of the public ordination, when Bhante talked about mine and Ratnaguna's names, he said, when people say the name Ratnaguna, meaning jewel qualities, they should just see multicoloured jewels raining down from the sky. And when people say the name Padmavajra, they should see lotuses unfolding and Vajras descending. Obviously, Bhante was very inspired, very, very uplifted. In fact, he sent a postcard to me not long afterwards, and the last line of the postcard, he was instructing me about, I'd undertaken to transcribe the Shepherd Search for Mind seminar that we did, and he wanted to make sure that I transcribed absolutely every word. But at the end he said, what a perfect weekend, what a perfect weekend. And it was a perfect weekend. So it was very rich, very moving, and I really felt that I'd arrived. I really felt that, well, not just arrived, that I'd really started. I felt being given, my mantra recitation, being given my name, being initiated into the Dharma in this way, being ordained. I thought surely, if I just did my practice, my sadhana, every day, surely within 2 years, the Bodhicitta would arise. The Bodhicitta would surely arise. I wasn't interested in stream entry. I wanted the Bodhicitta to arise. I think I had an idea in my mind that the arising of the Bodhicitta would mean this great force that would arise, and then without any effort on my part, I would just be moving along, blown along by the force of wisdom and compassion, dispensing wisdom and well-being to all those around me. Very naive, you might say, perhaps over-idealistic, but that's what I thought. Interestingly, of course, it wasn't like that. Of course it wasn't like that. How could it be like that? And very, very soon after ordination, I got the sort of, if you like, the messages from life and the communications from life that were communicating, no, this is going to be a lot more difficult than you realise. Recently, since Bhante died, since Sangharakshita died, I've noticed many things sort of coming into my mind that were there, that he taught, that he communicated, and which, although I knew them, I'd sort of forgotten their significance. Very soon after Bhante died, what was in my mind was the exhortation that comes in the ordination ceremony, our ordination ceremony, both in the private and public ordination ceremony. The words that go, having well observed the 3 refuges, together with the Dharmachari, or if you're a woman, Dharmacharini, together with the Dharmachari or Dharmacharini ordination vows, with mindfulness strive on. Appamadena sampadeta. With mindfulness strive on. I could hear appamadena sampadeta with Bhante's voice as I was meditating not long after he died. And of course, these are the last words of the Buddha as well. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha says, look, impermanent are all compounded things. With mindfulness strive. The last words of the Buddha, with mindfulness strive. And within the context of the ordination ceremony, it's like the last words of the transmission after or the first words, if you like, after the transmission of the refuges and precepts. Your preceptor is using those words. And Bhante always used to say when he did ordinations that it's as if the Buddha is saying, all you need is mindfulness and striving. If you have mindfulness and striving, you will go for refuge. You will keep going for refuge. You will become irreversible, but you need that mindfulness and you need that striving. This word for mindfulness in this context is appamada in Pali, apramada in Sanskrit. And it's a very interesting word. It's a very important word. It can be translated as mindfulness, so long as you think of mindfulness as a real alertness, a mindfulness coming out of your deepest possible values, an awareness and alertness to protect those values and to move forward in your Dharma training. That's the quality of appramada. It's a very rich term that the Buddha has spoken about a lot. You have a whole chapter on it in the Dhammapada, I think, 3rd chapter, I think, the Appamadovagga, which begins with words, mindfulness is the way to the deathless. Appamada is the way to the deathless. Those who are mindful do not die. whereas the unmindful are already dead. Very, very powerful language. I quoted this recently to a Sufi scholar because he had concerns about what mindfulness meant. And I said, well, I bet you have something like this in your tradition. And I recited it to him and he said, wow, I didn't know what Buddhist mindfulness was pointing to. So it's a negative pamada. It's literally non-heedlessness. Pamada means heedlessness. It actually comes from a word meaning intoxication. So it's non-intoxication, non-heedlessness, non-carelessness. But these negatives in to do with positive states are positives. So it's probably better to think of it as vigilance. It can be translated as conscientiousness, carefulness, wakeful awareness. It's a vigilant awareness emerging from our deepest values. And at times of vision, it's interesting, at the time of an ordination, at times which in a way I regard my own ordination as a time of great, if you like, vision and uplift and inspiration. At times like that, you need to be vigilant. You need to be vigilant. You need to be particularly mindful. In a way, it's a kind of, you could also say it's reminding you of the need for a certain sobriety, if you like. And this is the topic of chapter 4 of the Bodhicaryavatara. Chapter 4 of the Bodhicaryavatara is called Bodhicitta Pramada, vigilance in relation to the Bodhicitta. Vigilance in relation to the Bodhicitta. Some translators translate it as carefulness or conscientiousness in relation to the Bodhicitta. But I think the whole tone of Shantideva's text, the way he writes, vigilance, I think, is a much better word. I'll just read you the first 8 verses so you can get a bit of a feel for this chapter. The son of the conqueror, who has taken on the bodhicitta with great resolve, must constantly and alertly make every effort not to transgress the bodhisattva training. It is proper to reconsider whether or not one should carry out any rash undertaking or anything not thoroughly thought through, even if one has already promised to do it. But why hold back from what has been thought through by the Buddhas and their sons, who are great in wisdom and thought through by me too, as far as I am able? Moreover, after making a promise of this kind, if I were not to fulfill it in practice and broke my word to all those beings, what will be my future birth? It is taught that a man who has only thought about giving in his mind, but does not actually do so, becomes a hungry ghost, even if the gift were only small. How much worse will it be for me, having proclaimed aloud the unsurpassed happiness with great enthusiasm, after breaking my word to the entire world, what would be my future birth? Only the all-knowing one knows the inconceivable course of action which can still liberate people even when they've abandoned the bodhicitta. Every error of a bodhisattva is all the more serious, since when he errs, he deprives every being of benefit. So it's very, very stirring, very strong language here. The previous chapters have really been concerned with vision. Yes, there's been the confession of faults, the sobriety of the confession of faults, but the last chapter, there is the tremendous taking of the vow. There's this tremendous sense of being born anew as a son of the Buddha and living up to his birth as a son of the Buddha, of being in this new Buddha Kula, Buddha family, and taking those great vows to liberate all living beings. It really, really does communicate the arising of the bodhicitta and the taking of the bodhisattva vow. and there's so much celebration and worship and so on. He really pledges himself. He really promises, really vows to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. It's interesting, the word for promise in these verses is pratigna. And pratigna is exactly the word that Dr. Ambedkar uses in his 22 vows, which he gave to his followers in Nagpur at the time of the Great Conversion in 1956. And we looked at that last week. Pratigna, the Bowis pratigna, the 22 vows. Pratigna means a pledge, an oath, a vow, a promise. It's a very, very strong word. It's what we're doing at ordination. The great teachers, particularly in the Tibetan tradition, describe the act of going for refuge as a pledge, as a promise, to live the full Buddhist life, to go for refuge. But this section, and of course the promise of the vows have come out of tremendous vision and inspiration. They've come out of really seeing something. And presumably for Shantideva, a real experience, for want of a better word, of perhaps self and other breaking down, that his own life is completely and utterly interconnected with all life, that he can only lead a life devoted to the development of wisdom and compassion. But in this section, there's tremendous sobriety. In the section on vigilance in regard to the bodhicitta, there's the question, what have I done? What does this mean? What are the implications of this? I've made this tremendous promise. Well, what does that mean? And what would it mean if I break that vow, if I turn back? He even says, only the Buddha knows the inconceivable course of action for one who rejects the bodhicitta. I remember Bhante once saying that Mr. Chen used to take, every so often, he'd take a new bodhisattva vow. And one of them was a vow to liberate people, to go and find people who had rejected the bodhicitta. He wanted to take that on because it was so serious. I think this particular chapter on vigilance in regard to the bodhicitta, which I always, when I used to recite the Bodhicaryavatara, I liked the first three sections, the fourth less so, well, and the other chapters even less so. That was because it's getting more real. This stuff just got real, as they say. They didn't put it quite like that, but you know what I mean. But I think this I think was one of the reasons why the Bodhicaryavatara has such appeal, or has had such appeal all over the Buddhist world, because it actually describes spiritual psychology, as it were, or the psychology of spiritual unfoldment very accurately. There are those times of great vision, where we really see, where we really are up there, we really are there. We really are in touch with the bodhicitta. We make a movement in that direction. We go for refuge. We take great vows, but then that is followed, it almost seems always, by a serious self-questioning. Perhaps eventually that will change. There is in the 10 paramitar system of Mahayana Buddhism the perfection of the vow. So the vow never goes away. It seems to reoccur as a sort of independent force. But here there's this serious self-questioning. It's not negative doubt. It's not that doubt and indecision. Oh, shall I, shan't I? That's not what is being got at here, but a healthy, sober, putting oneself to the question. And we see this many times in our community. People get invited to be ordained. They get invited to be ordained, and sometimes after, when they get the letter, there's great exhilaration, great excitement, wonderful. Something's been recognised, and that's always followed by a serious self-questioning. Sometimes people even say, no, it's not the time. and they decide not to go forward. There's more work to do. I've seen that happen. But there's a serious self-questioning. Or they get ordained. They get given that richness of the Dharma, and then that is followed by a serious self-questioning. It can come up when they wear that kesa and they use that name, perhaps particularly in classes, and people look at them in a different way, as they should. As they should. Don't try and say after you've been ordained and you've got the kesa and the name and you've been recognised as going for refuge. Well, I'm not just going to sort of fit into other people's views about me. I think that's a cop-out. People will have views about you because we take ordination very seriously. We've made a very strong public commitment. That means something. So we need to be worthy of that. We need to live up to that, and sometimes that's very difficult to do. Sometimes when people step up in responsibility in the movement, perhaps when they become a preceptor, well, not just perhaps, I know this for a fact, they become a preceptor, somebody who themselves can perform ordinations, is immediately, or very often, a deep self-searching and questioning. Any stepping up and out into something, you have to then weigh what the responsibility is. Let's be very clear, the Bodhisattva vow is not about pious sentiment. It's very, very easy to have sort of sentimental feelings, reciting verses to do with liberating all beings, having great compassion. The word compassion is terribly tainted, I think, because of sentimentality. In the tradition, the real tradition of somebody like Shantideva, you can see that the Bodhisattva vow, the Bodhisattva's life, the Bodhicitta, is to do with serious, vigorous and realistic engagement. And that means tremendous self-honesty. And this chapter, Vigilance in the Bodhicitta, is illustrating that. Every error of a Bodhisattva is all the more serious, since when he errs, he deprives every being of benefit. Sounds very heavy, but as far as Shantideva is concerned, that's what he's done. He's publicly pledged. Perhaps there's even old-fashioned traditional ways of the power of the word here. If you say you're going to do something, if you invoke the vow, the word, well, you've put something out there into the cosmos. Be careful what you say you're going to do, because if you don't do it, there are implications. I remember Bhante once saying that Tibetans only very carefully gave their word. They had a sense of the power of the word. He said if you'd ask a Tibetan to do something, they take a long time thinking about doing it. But when they said they would do it, you know they would do it. The word had that much power. Every error of a bodhisattva is all the more serious since when he errs, he deprives every being of benefit. And again, we can see this in our own unfolding Dharma life, that as we develop, as our consciousness starts to expand, as we start to make more profound connections and bonds with people, well, as you go on, you have the potential of letting down more people. And after this, Shantideva has these I find these particularly sort of poignant verses, really. Verse 11, swinging back and forth like this in cyclic existence, now under the sway of errors, now under the sway of the bodhicitta, it takes a long time to gain ground. Therefore, I must diligently fulfill what I have promised. If I make no effort today, I shall sink to lower and lower levels. But this swinging back and forth in cyclic existence, now under the sway of errors, now under the sway of the bodhicitta, it takes a long time to gain ground. I mean, that describes my Dharma life, I think. I won't say it's in relation to the bodhicitta, that's too elevated, but swinging back and forth between the vision of the Dharma life, if you like, going for refuge, faith, and everything that comes with it, and errors. It takes a long time to gain ground. Sometimes you feel you've gained that ground, only to find that you swing away from that ground. The word for ground is bhumi. And of course, Shantideva also has in mind the attainments of the bhumis. The Bodhisattva path is the standing on and the emergence into different grounds, different earths, different bhumis. It takes a long time to gain ground, swinging back and forth between the power of the bodhicitta and our errors. But he recommits. He's therefore I must diligently fulfill what I have promised. If I make no effort today, I shall sink to lower and lower levels. So there's this recommitment. Just one of the things that we haven't gone into, which is touched on in the first section on praising the bodhicitta, we need to make the distinction between the bodhipranidhi citta and the bodhiprasthana citta. I mean, there are almost three different things that you need to be aware of, three different movements almost. There's the bodhicittotpada, the arising of the bodhicitta. Then there's the bodhisattva vow, the commitment to living out that bodhicitta. And then there is the establishment of the bodhicitta in your life. And they make a distinction between the two. You can have a very strong aspiration and vow. You may even have those moments of vision where you're really uplifted, really living it, but it's got to be established. The bodhicitta has got to move into the nitty-gritty of your life and transform all of the material that's keeping you away from the bodhicitta. And that, I think, that process will just go on and on for the rest of our Dharma life. So Shantideva, the next thing he does is to get back to some basics. When shall I find such rare circumstances again? The arising of a Tathagata, faith, the human state itself, the capacity to practice skillful deeds, health, and this day, with food and freedom from disaster, in a moment, life breaks its promise. The body is like an object on loan. So here you've got those basic recollections. You've got these recollections of the rare circumstances, being born at a time where the Tathagata has arisen. The Buddha is taught. The Dharma is available. There is faith. I have faith in that. I have the human state itself. And so I have the capacity to practice skillful deeds. I'm more or less healthy. And there is food this day. And there is freedom from disaster. In a moment, life breaks its promise. The body is an object, like an object on loan. So impermanence, reflection. So this is a wonderful set of verses which you could really memorize, and they have a real sort of ring to them, I think, even in English translation. So he's coming back to those basic reflections, which I think we talked about in the first talk. He also has other reflections when he talks about not making the most of what he's got. He starts to do a meditation on the effects of breaking his vow and of becoming more and more unskillful. After those wonderful verses about the human state, he goes into further considerations of where unskillfulness, where selfishness, where the defilements, where not living up to his vow leads. He goes deeper and deeper into that. And for Shantideva, that results in hell. He really evokes the avicii hell, the unending hell in the sense of unending pain. Not just hell as an external place. In fact, hell isn't really an external place at all, generally. But the burning of remorse, the psychology, if you like. Perhaps that's more, we can relate to that more, the sense of remorse and shame, natural remorse, natural shame in relation to unskillful acts that we have done. And I know many people, when they read this kind of material in Buddhist texts and in Shantideva, they find it very uncomfortable. They find it very off-putting, this kind of meditation, this kind of reflection. Very often it evokes perhaps their theistic past or theistic religion and so on, that punishment, as it were, awaits us just for being alive, as it were. But what Shantideva is doing, it's quite different. It's much more straightforward than that. It's to do with the development of this sobriety, this sober, vigilant awareness. There is no question of any external punisher. The suffering he's talking about arise from the consequences of his own actions. That's what he's getting at. It's coming back to that whole law of karma, as we call it. If we behave unskillfully, if we turn away from what we know to be good in the strict Buddhist sense, there are consequences. In fact, he goes on with that. He talks about how it will become more and more difficult to practice skillfulness. This is again something that we don't sort of talk about very much. We tend to be quite psychological in the way we talk about the effects of unskillful action, that it will just affect our minds, it will just affect us. And as if, and we could sort of change that very easily. But if we follow a train of unskillfulness, that will take us into situations where it will become more and more difficult to act skillfully. I've heard many people's life stories, and you can see it's like watching one of those films, one of those sort of tragic films, hearing people's life stories before they found the Dharma, and how one unskillful deed led to another, led them to association with particular groups of people, and before they know it, they're sort of trapped inside something which becomes more and more difficult to get out of. Thankfully they did, and found their way to the Dharma. So Shantideva is being very, very sober indeed about reneging against his commitment to the Bodhicitta. And so what is the cause? What is the cause of this situation? Well, of course, the cause is in the mind itself. He says this: though I have somehow come to a nigh unattainable place of advantage, this human life, the Bodhisattva path, and though I understand this, still I am led back to those self-same hells once more. I have no will in this matter, as if bewildered by spells. I do not understand. By what am I perplexed? Who dwells here within me? Enemies such as greed and hate lack hands and feet and other limbs. They are not brave, nor are they wise. How is it they enslave me? Lodged within my own mind, it is me that they strike down, themselves unshaken. Yet I do not boil with rage at this. Oh, such ill-placed forbearance. Very, very strong language, but I can really relate to that. Have you ever had that thing? Why am I like this? Why am I so reactive? I don't understand. Why am I getting caught up in this, that and the other? I'm bewildered by spells. And these things that make me do it, they're not real. You can't sort of get hold of them. And why am I not more angry about it? Of course, Shantideva, we're going to come on to Kshanti Paramita, the perfection of patience, which is so important for a bodhisattva. But here he's saying this is ill-founded patience. I think sometimes we don't get annoyed enough with ourselves. We don't get enraged enough with our own idiocy. Well, speaking personally, I really think I could be a lot more properly enraged. I think in Vajrayana Buddhism, they turn everything around. You have the Maharaga, which is the great passion, which is the great compassion for all beings. But you also have the Mahakrodha, the great anger, the great wrath, which of course is the wrath to your own ignorance and your own stupidity and your own kleshas, the Mahakrodha, the Krodha that's pouring out of emptiness. Mr. Chen was very, very keen on things like Maharaga, Mahakrodha. I'm conscious that just behind me, I don't think you can see them on the film, on one side there is Achala Raja, a great Vidyaraja, wrathful king, and the other side there's wrathful Vajrapani. Well, these are embodiments of Mahakrodha. But what are these things? So what he's concerned about, of course, is the kleshas. That's what he starts to go into. It's the kleshas in our mind that are the problem. The kleshas, they can be translated as the defilements, the afflictions, the disturbing emotions, the passions. I think defilements is probably the best. And affliction, I think, is very good. Just so long as you understand that we do the afflicting of ourselves. And of course, there are various lists of kleshas, great long lists of them. There are the 5. Ignorance, that's avidya, moha, mithya drishti, wrong views, that collection. That's a whole collection of klesha. There's raga, in the sense of sort of intense craving, passion. There's dvesha, hatred and ill will. There's mana, which is conceit. The conceit which is the view that you are superior to others, the view that you are inferior to others, the view that you are equal to others. And there's all sorts of manifestations of that particular conceit. There's irshya, jealousy, that sense of envy at others' success, at others' greatness, that very nasty, comparison. These are all klesha. And as I say, they have all sorts of brothers and sisters and cousins. These are the enemies within. These are the enemies of the bodhicitta. It's these that prevent the bodhicitta from taking over. This is it's this lot, this crowd, that we need to be particularly vigilant about. Shantideva is very clear, they are enemies. They're not your friends. The kleshas are not your friends. They are your enemies. They're destructive afflictions. He describes them as the jailers of the prison of existence. The jailers of the prison of existence dwell in our minds. So this is what he says. For this reason, I shall cast off the burden here until these enemies are struck down before my eyes. Once their anger has been aroused, people who are inflated with pride do not sleep until their enemy has been slain, even if he caused only a slight offence. In the vanguard of the battle, violently passionate to kill bringers of darkness, destined by nature to suffer death, not counting the pain from blows of arrows and spears, they do not turn away until they have achieved his end. What then, when I am striving to kill my natural enemies, the kleshas, who are the eternal causes of every pain? Today, even if I suffer 100 afflictions, what reason do I have to feel the misery of despair? Without cause, they display the wounds from the enemy on their limbs, as if they were decorations. Why then, when I am striving to fulfill the great cause, the liberation of all beings, do I let my sufferings oppress me? Their minds set only on their own livelihood, fishermen, chandalas, that's outcasts, ploughmen and the like, withstand such distress as extreme heat and cold. Why have I no endurance, though it is for the advantage and well-being of the universe? What he's getting at here, he's really evoking the warrior spirit in relation to the kleshas. Shantideva's background is a kshatriya, of course, and he's evoking that pride. Some people, when they're insulted by an enemy, they will not sleep until they've completely done over that enemy. I remember reading Swan Sung's great account of the area we now call Maharashtra in India, and he said in Maharashtra the people were well known for being your greatest friends and brothers, but if they felt slighted by you, they would become your worst enemy, and they would strike you down on the basis of that pride. I don't know if my friends in Maharashtra who might be listening to this would agree with that. But Shantideva's trying to get us in touch with a very positive sense of pride and dignity in relation to the kleshas. These kleshas are our foes. Every time craving takes over, every time we do craving, or hatred, or resentment, or jealousy, or conceit, or indulging in ignorance, well, that's like somebody really slighting us identified with the Bodhicitta. We're not going to take that. I'm not going to take that. You could even imagine a whole scenario, when the klesha pops up, you could do a Robert De Niro, couldn't you? You could say, are you looking at me? Are you looking at me, Mr. Klesha? You could do that whole thing. I mean, maybe I'm going over the top. But that's what he's doing. Shantideva does this. He really tries to dramatize what's going on internally. Remember, it's hard to see these kleshas. They're sort of invisible. He's trying to give us a way of almost visualizing them and finding a response to them that makes it tangible. And he talks about, warriors don't care about the blows they get. They show off, look at that scar. The cooks, Arvid and the other people who've been the cooks in the kitchen, they proudly show their burns on their arms and their plasters, and so on. Perhaps they've just been a little bit unmindful in the kitchen, but but no, that's what people do, don't they? That's what warriors do. So Shantideva is saying, okay, it's tough, it's hard. The Buddhist life is difficult. Proudly show off. Proudly show what you're doing. Proudly show the strain, if you like. Proudly show your wounds from your practice. I know, sometimes when I've studied this with people get very, very nervous. They say, yeah, but I think you're going to set up so much tension within yourself. Shouldn't one just accept everything that's going on? And I said, well, tell it to Shantideva. I mean, I don't think he would agree with you. The kleshas are enemies. Okay, if this doesn't work for you, this warrior attitude, find another way. But you've got to purge yourself of the kleshas. They're preventing the arising of the bodhicitta. Let's not be all soft about that. When I see my negative emotions, I mean, I really don't like them. They're really ugly. I am really ugly when I'm in that state. I feel there's no self-respect when I'm in that state. And there's no use stroking myself, saying, oh no, you're a wonderful person, really. No, I'm not. Not in that state. Not in that state of self-indulgence. I am not a wonderful person. I'm an idiot. And I need to really do something about it. The other thing that he also does, he evokes labourers. I find this very interesting. Ploughmen, fishermen, the poor outcast Chandala people who are probably, picking up the night soil, terrible toil, enslaved to, the caste Hindus. It's very interesting that Shantideva brings to mind people toiling and labouring in that way. He's living, in a monastery doing his studies, and he's more or less saying, look at the way these people work. Just to survive, just to have a little bit of food, just to have a hovel over their heads. Well, what about me? What about my endurance in relation to the kleshas. I think it's very, very pertinent to us, perhaps here, even in our wonderful conditions and circumstances, very pertinent to me. It really is sort of quite shocking sometimes the way, I think we're pretty good here, I would say that. But it is shocking sometimes the way Buddhists go, indulge their kleshas, especially when it leads to disharmony with other Buddhists. That's all it is. It's just klesha. It's just klesha coming out in relation to one another. And we should be engaging with this, toiling with it, like these hard-working people. That's what we should be doing. So he goes on. I have promised to liberate the universe from the defilements, to the limits of space in the 10 directions. But even my own self is not free from defilements. At the time of making that promise, I must have been intoxicated, speaking without realizing my own limitations. But even so, I can never turn back from destroying the defilements. I shall be tenacious in this and wage war, sworn to enmity against the murdering defilements, but retaining the passion, the word here is klesha, the passion to murder the defilements. See, he's done it again. He's using an unskillful word in relation to the unskillfulness. I do not care if my guts ooze out, let my head fall off, but never shall I bow down before the enemy, the defilements. Even if banished, an enemy may acquire retinue and support in another country and return from there with gathered strength. But there is no such resort for this enemy, the defilements. So he really returns to his pledge, and it's very, very strong language, and that commitment to the war against the defilements, very, very strong kind of warrior, evocation. This is quite important in Buddhist tradition. The amount of times that the Buddha and all the great disciples, right through to, all of the traditions you care to mention, the warrior spirit is very, very strong. This metaphor is there deliberately. It's a battle, it's a striving, it's a padana, as the Buddha calls it in the Sutta Nipata. Dr. Ambedkar has a passage in his Buddha and his Dhamma, a very striking passage, which I think is based on a traditional source, where the Buddha is saying to his monks, we are warriors. Monks, we are warriors. What are we fighting, monks? We're fighting greed, hatred, and delusion. We're fighting greed, hatred, and delusion in the world, not just in themselves, but in the world. Very, very strong language. And then Shantideva starts to tell us, in a way you could say that the rest of the Bodhicaryavatara is getting down to the actual practice of how you purify yourself of the defilements, how you see through the defilements. But he gives us a little way, a little start into that. So he says, based in my mind, where might that enemy, the defilements, go once cast out? Where might it stay and work towards my destruction? I make no effort simply because my mind is dull. The defilements are weaklings to be conquered by wisdom's glare. Wisdom's glare. The prajna drishti. Wisdom's vision, wisdom's glare. I make no effort because my mind is dull. So if you really want to see the defilements, see through the defilements, you have to make your mind sharp, clear. And you do this particularly, of course, through shamatha meditation, through ethical practice, shamatha, devotion, but you're making the mind really clear so that you can see. So you can see the defilements clearly. And you can see through the defilements clearly. The next verse puts it amazingly. The defilements do not dwell in objects. Well, we know they don't dwell in objects. nor in the collection of the senses. If we were to go through our senses, eye, ear, nose, we wouldn't find a klesha in any of that, a defilement. We wouldn't find it in the objects outside or in our senses, nor in the space between what I'm looking at, what I'm sensing, and my senses. There is nowhere else for them to dwell, and yet they churn up the entire universe. Where are these things? And yet, these invisible forces churn up the entire universe. This is but illusion. Maya. So heart, Hridaya, so heart, free yourself from fear. Devote yourself to striving for wisdom. Why, quite needlessly, do you torment yourself in hells? So prajna drishti, the vision of wisdom, the great clarity, the vision of shunyata, the sense of the illusory nature of everything, both internal and external. Shantideva is evoking the brilliant, dazzling vision that sees through the kleshas. That's what, in the end, makes them go. You've got to do a lot of preliminary work. You've got to do a lot of preliminary work before you can do that. That's where ethics and shamatha and all the classical practice, spiritual friendship, all of those great conditions of practice are so important, because you've got to keep the kleshas, the gross kleshas at bay. But in the end, you've got to see through them. You've got to see it all as the dreamlike nature, the Maya-like, illusory nature of everything. It's very interesting. While I was thinking about this passage, I recalled a panel discussion that Bhante was on with Thich Nhat Hanh and Sogyal Rinpoche and the Venerable Rewata Dhamma in Berlin in a big Buddhist conference. And there was a question that was on shunyata, and a question put by one of the panel to the Theravadin monk: why don't you have shunyata in the Theravada? And the monk gave a good answer, but Bhante came in and said a very interesting thing. He said he believed there was shunyata in the Theravada and shunyata in the early schools of Buddhism, but he thought that the way shunyata was particularly discussed was more, as it were, psycho-spiritually, whereas in the Mahayana the emphasis was more on the metaphysics. And what he meant by this, when he talked about shunyata to do with the more psycho-spiritual way of looking at it, he said that's found in that great tradition of the Abhidharma. The Abhidharma tradition, its analysis, and it's pointing to different states of mind. So in the Abhidharma, you're not seeing just a composite, or you're not seeing just a fixed and unchanging solid lump. You're seeing how composite the human consciousness, how all of life is just made up of dharmas, an ever-flowing and ever-changing set of dharmas. And of course, in that tradition, you've got this very precise and detailed identification of what's skillful, what's unskillful, what do you need to develop, what do you need to put down. Bhante thought this is so important. And of course, you get lists of kleshas and upakleshas. One of the things you've got to do when you're developing wisdom's glare is to actually know what a klesha really is. There's no use doing some fancy pseudo-shunyata reflection when you actually don't know what's afflicting you. You've got to see it for what it is. And the Abhidharma is brilliant. That's why Bhante did that seminar, which I went on not long after I was ordained. Mine in Buddhist Psychology, Yeshua Geltzen's The Necklace of Clear Understanding, which has flowed into Know Your Mind, and what's the other one? Mind in Harmony. He thought it was so important, this text, one of the most important things he's ever done, for getting clear about what we need to move away from and what we need to develop. So the first stage, if you like, of wisdom's glare is seeing kleshas as they really are. And I must admit, that seminar, I went on that just a few months after I was ordained. That was a very sobering time after all the vision of ordination, because every klesha I had in abundance, and I could barely see the roots of skillfulness within me. That was a big wake-up call for me, that particular seminar. So, and of course, in the Mahayana, the emphasis is more on seeing through. There's no klesha, there's no seer, there's no seen. Bhante does a wonderful little comment on this in the endlessly fascinating cry on what this might mean. So this is his discussion of wisdom's glare and seeing everything as an illusion. When you know it's a magical illusion, you see that it's just not really there. You have your perception, but at the same time, you know that there's nothing on which your perception is based. That even though you are perceiving the object, it is not in reality there. To the Indian, this way of thinking and illustrating seems very natural. I don't myself feel any difficulty with it, but it's not very much in accordance with the usual Western ways of thinking and explaining. So perhaps it isn't very helpful. Perhaps if we were to see a magical illusion one day, this sort of comparison would mean more to us. You would exclaim, I could have sworn it was there. I saw it. I could smell it. Yet it disappears. The kleshas, the passions, are like that, Shantideva says. Perhaps, this is still Bhante, perhaps we can get closer to an understanding of the matter by recalling what happens when we've been in a really bad mood. Once the bad mood is over, there's absolutely nothing left. It wasn't about anything at all. It was a storm in a teacup. And we think, why did it affect me so strongly? Why did I get so upset? It was nothing really. Even the feeling I had was nothing. Sometimes we do reflect like that. Sometimes we really do reflect like that or feel like that. And I think it's that sort of thing that Shantideva is getting at. Only we should try to see through the passions and realise their illusory magical nature at the very time that we're experiencing them, so that in that way we dispel them. What usually happens is that we see it only afterwards, in retrospect. It's difficult to see it at the time. It's very interesting. I only discovered that little passage the other day, the relationship between seeing the illusory, dreamlike nature of things and its relationship to changing moods. I think part of the difficulty I'd had with the metaphor for years was this idea of seeing, whereas maybe it's more to do with my nature. I have a strong sort of feeling sense, I suppose, and I'm a very moody person. And there was a solitary retreat I did a bit back where I sort of got more of a handle on my moods, and I could sort of see it in relation to this teaching of the illusory nature of things. It wasn't about me looking around trying to see things as though they're not solid. It was more of having a sense of how changeable my moods were. The metaphor that came to me was it was more that I changed colour and shape on a rather alarmingly fast basis. I could go from the sublime to the sordid within seconds, it seemed. The peaks of ecstasy, the vast abysses of misery, and everything in between, all sorts of ever-changing states. And I always used to find that disturbing, but I thought, well, no, that's the nature of things. That's what happens. So why not just enjoy the show, almost? Just be with that ever-changing nature of things and just sort of marvel at it in some way. And as the retreat went on, I became more and more content. I mean, this is all very elementary material, I know, but it was a sort of revelation to me. But I had to sort of have a sense of it being more of a feeling thing rather than a sort of cognitive thing, if you like. But what came to mind as this was happening, what came to mind was Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, the Lotus King, the great yogi, when he's banished to the cremation grounds, and he's communicating with the worldly Darkinis. These are the worldly Darkinis, the sort of embodiments of the most extreme passion and klesha. You have to make sure you identify the right Darkini. These aren't the Darkinis that are enlightened. These aren't the Darkinis of the inspiration pouring through the vast space of Shunyata. They might turn into that, but at first these Darkinis are a bit different. You have to be a bit careful with them. But Padmasambhava sits in the cremation ground going bright red. You see depictions of him. Bright red. His eyes are large. His face is intense, blissful, penetrating, and he's just looking at the scene. And what does he see? There are to be seen countless Darkinis. Some of them have eyes that dart out sun rays. Others give rise to thunderclaps and ride water buffaloes. Others hold sabres and have eyes which inflict harm. Others wear death's heads, one above the other, and ride tigers. Others wear corpses and ride lions. Others eat entrails and ride garudas. Others have flaming lances and ride jackals. Others, five-faced, are steeped in a lake of blood. Others, in their numberless hands, carry many generations of living beings. Others carry in their hands their own heads, which they have severed. Bhante did a little comment on that. Well, some of you probably have done that. Others carry in their hands their own hearts, which they have torn out. There are others who have made gaping wounds in their own bodies and who empty out and devour their own intestines and entrails. There are others who hide and yet reveal their male or female sexual organs, riding horses, bulls, elephants. In the central lake, cloud of purification, is the charnel ground, the haunted place where others cannot venture. There they stand, sucking the substance of life. Thinking of the conversion to be carried out, Padmasambhava, having come to this place, took for a seat a heap of recent and older corpses. Trembling with fear, the living beings who dwelt in the cemetery came forward to offer him fruits of rare beauty, while the Darkinis bowed down to him again and again. Now, leaning against the central stupa, for 5 years, by means of the 9 excellent vehicles, Padmasambhava taught the Dharma to the crowd of Darkinis. So, you could also look perhaps at dealing with the kleshas in that way, looking at this dance, the display of Darkinis, and really gazing at them, staring at them with wisdom's glare, transforming them onto the path of the Dharma. However you do it, whether it's studying the Abhidharma, whether it's Shunyata meditation, whether it's looking into the Darkinis, whether it's being aware of your ever-changing moods, it's all to do with banishing and purging ourselves of the kleshas, so that the bodhicitta will shine more fully and more brightly, and we behave like a bodhisattva. Shantideva ends vigilance with regard to the bodhicitta with, again, some more salutary, sober advice. Making a firm resolve in this way, I shall strive to follow the training as it has been taught. How can someone who could be cured by medicine get well if he does not follow the doctor's advice? Thank you.